Whenever I create an external shot, I always think in terms of 4 layers of depth: the foreground, the midground, the background, and the sky. This establishes a nice 3-dimensional depth to the image. Remember to create a new layer for each of these layers of depth. So we're going to start with the most distant layer, which is going to be the bottom layer in Gimp, and we're going to work backwards, or rather forwards. Your sky can be flat and featureless, or it can have subtle shades of colour. Of course, it can have clouds. Let's start with a summery blue sky. In daytime, you mostly see one shade of blue. Just after sunrise or just before sunset, you'll see different colours. The sky near the sun will be a lighter shade of blue than the sky further up. It's a very gradual gradation of colour, so we need to try and mimic this in Gimp. It's quite easy. Just take a paintbrush tool, increase the size, pick a fuzzy edge. Now choose a lighter shade of blue and draw this over the image. Now we're going to take this image and we're going to blur the whole thing. Blur, Gaussian blur, increase the intensity until you get the desired effect. This is a very easy way to get that airbrushed effect. You can create a stormy or overcast effect by mixing up shades of grey in a similar way. For clouds, create a new layer on top of the sky. Use an irregular shaped tool. Pick your white and make some shapes. Then we're going to take a fuzzy layer tool and we're going to smudge them a little. Trying to blend it into the background, make it look like fluffy wispy clouds. You can then blur that layer to make it more diffuse. With a landscape, you're creating a sense of a much larger space. And we can do this using techniques that mimic real optical effects. The further away an object is, the less detailed it will appear. So for the next layer, which is the far distance, we want a fairly simple design. Remember that the background line here will mark out the horizon. We don't want the horizon to be right in the middle. It's not as visually appealing as having it either 1/3 up or 2/3 up the image. This is something that photographers call the rule of thirds. We're going to take our tool and we're going to mark out the edge of like a tree line like a forest background. Then use the paint bucket tool to colour it in. You can add some details here, some darker shades. Not too much detail, it doesn't matter too much at this point. You can use the smudge tool again to blend that into the background that we've already created. You can also adjust this layer by blurring it, by blurring the whole thing in Gaussian blur. Sometimes that helps. The midground and the foreground can have more detail, and you don't always have to have a very sharp division between them, but still keep them on separate layers, so you can make changes to each one individually if you want to. If your characters interact with the background, it makes both of them look more real. Just a simple thing like adding a shadow on the ground, or the opposite, adding a reflection of light onto the character from the background image. That makes it look more realistic, it anchors them together. For this character, I've added some grass stains on his clothes from a little alfresco grappling, something to link him to the image. This creates a more genuine feel for the image as a whole. Detailed background is a nice touch and it can be very rewarding for your reader, but bear in mind that usually you don't want it to overtake the foreground image. The background is too busy, too colourful, it drowns out the foreground. The best way to tone this down is to use Gaussian blur or to turn down the colour saturation or to lighten the background image. Sometimes you want elements of your background to be in the foreground, like for example a person sitting at a table. One way to do this is to put the character image on top and then cut out the parts where you want the foreground to show through. You can see through the image by reducing the opacity. Select the parts that you want to delete. Use the lasso tool to cut them out. Edit clear, and now turn the opacity back up again. Another way is to create a new layer with the foreground object and lay this on top of the middle layer. For example, a railing which is part of a model. You want your characters behind to be visible in the negative spaces. Now I can put the character on top, make them translucent, cut out the parts I don't want. But what if I change my mind and I want to reposition this character? It's better to have a layer of this railing on top with the negative spaces already removed. I'm going to do this by selecting the railing within the image. It's very important to select the top left corner of the image when you make this kind of selection. This way, when I paste it back in, it'll be in the exact correct position. Copy, select all, and paste as new image. I can put my character in the original image. Now I have this piece of railing as a separate image. Select all, go back to the original, copy and paste as new layer. Make sure you paste as new layer in place. This will put it exactly in the right position. Now I can place the character behind this layer, and I can move the character around to my liking, and it doesn't matter where these spaces are. There are other elements of background like buildings and creating trees and vegetation, but I'm going to deal with that in another video. So that's all for now. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, let me know in the comments. Goodbye.